Thank you very much. Let me just pack that away because otherwise I wanted to quickly share with you an approach that I have in the process of perfecting after 25 years in classrooms. You'll notice I've got 3 job titles. My day job's in Finland, and I also have a visiting professorship in business in Ireland. So I go to Ireland for my Guinness, and I go to Santiago, Chile for my wine. And you're going to see an awful lot of design inspiration. I'm not a trained designer, and I actually think design could be a voice that could solve a lot of the problems and issues that have been raised today. Let me tell you about Finland. That's the market cap of Finland, effectively. This is Nokia. And you kind of need to know that I arrived in Finland in 1998, and you can see the market cap of Nokia at that time. It was impossible for me to get students to start businesses. They wanted to join Nokia. They wanted to make money. And we rode a very good wave right up to the top. 4% of the country's economy, one company. 24,000 employees in Finland. And then we started this new university here in 2010, and you'll start to see that Nokia's fortunes fell rather dramatically, 24,000 employees. Then, when it started, 900 now. 23,000 people in Finland alone out of work. Something amazingly happened in 2010 is the students thought that the adults had basically screwed up the model, which I think is partly true, and that starting a new business was not risky anymore, which is not exactly true. Some stats for you, and I'll make sure you get these electronically. At the current moment, 8.7% unemployment, 20% unemployment among people less than 25 years old, which bothers me a great deal. 38% is the one that really shocks me. This is the percentage of the unemployed total who are over 50 years old. 40% of all the people who are unemployed in Finland are over 50. And I'm a very provocative guy. The Finnish government's solution to this is maybe these people should take early retirement. I'll be provocative and say, think again. Wrong answer. Wrong answer. And more about that in a minute. Why? Think of the bounds. I'm going to give you a little bit of a creativity lesson of how I think. Working is defined as 18 to 64 years old. Who put the bounds on this? On the lower end and on the upper end? And in fact, in full disclosure, I have to say my grandmother worked until she was 98. She lived until 108. And it was the fact that she was working even part-time to 98 that kept her in for a long innings at 108. Something strange happens when we hit 64. I'll have more to say about that in a few minutes. Last fall, my students worked on a challenge on rethinking the concept of aging, and I showed them this slide. This was designed by engineers. You're born, you go to school, you get a job, you save money, and you retire. Now, I don't know whether this is the case in Lebanon, but in Finland, this does not work. This does not work. And my students did 2 terms worth of work on that slide, and I'll be happy to share with you some of the thoughts that they had, some very radical thoughts about redesigning society. You get a feel for the kind of educator I am. This is what entrepreneurs need to know. There's a lot, and you might have this show in Lebanon. They did when I was a kid. This is the solution to the problem of what do you do with the kids on Saturday morning when the parents want to sleep in, right? And you do realize that Wile E. Coyote spends a lot of money on gadgets and never catches this roadrunner, and you sort of wonder why, because the roadrunner doesn't look like a particularly meaty bird to catch. There's lots of people inside labs who look like this, who do lots of gadgets that never seem to work. There's always a plan. This is a great plan. This is one back of a cocktail napkin. And people tell me I'm not a designer because I don't know how to draw. That's no excuse. You get the point. There's a coyote that's flying, and X marks the spot. There's a bomb, and drop, problem is solved. But you do have to know a lot about explosives, trajectories, and the one thing about this picture that I do not understand is how does the coyote continue to fly? Huh? We do a lot of this thinking. Light bulb moment, write a plan, go raise lots of money, retire. I'll tell you the facts, this does not work. Engineers love this, governments love this, left to right chevrons, and I'm sorry to say, real world is a lot messier. I will share this with you. This is a friend of mine from the University of Virginia. Her PhD supervisor was Herbert Simon, which some of you may know is a Nobel laureate in economics. She wrote this paper, did her PhD. The handwriting is from the founder of Sun Microsystems. I give this to every student that goes through either my executive training or graduate studies, all 35,000 of them. First good paper I've seen, written by a very prominent venture capitalist. And it was rejected. It was rejected by the academic community, and 4 years later went into Harvard Business Review, and we're very good friends, and she actually asked some very successful serial entrepreneurs, so if I gave you an opportunity, what would you do with it? Start talking. She started to codify it and realized actually that what we were teaching bore no resemblance to how successful entrepreneurs operate. And here's what she found. Oops. Everybody in this room has a different lens. You're passionate about different things, you're skilled about different things, and you know different people. And by the way, these things change as you go through life. I'm looking through a very experienced audience here. This is much more experienced than my typical classroom. But every single person in here looks at the world in a completely different way. This is a challenge, but it's a reality. And this is the fuel that gets you started, is everything is perceived. And I want to introduce you to a student of mine. This guy is 24 years old. His name is Kalle. You may happen to realize that Finland is, I think, the second, if not the first, top coffee consuming per capita country in the world. Every adult in Finland consumes over 10 kilos of coffee a year. Oops. And this guy, by the way, sipped his first cup of coffee at age 14. He's a bachelor's student who hasn't finished his bachelor's study. I'm his mentor. He is the 2015 and 2016 Barista of the Year in the Nordic region and the 9th ranked barista in the world, age 24. He also looks like somebody famous. He looks a bit like Bill Gates with nicer hair, right? A bit of advice. Always pursue something. He's going to do something in coffee. That's what he wants to do. And so I tell people, you've got to find your coffee bean, whatever that is. Something that you obsess about. Where time flies, you want to spend your time, and you think this is something that best expresses and best leverages me. And that's a highly personal part of the journey. I bring him into class, and he excites a whole lot of people. So it starts with you. That was her first finding. That's pretty obvious. Second finding, how much are you prepared to lose? I hear a lot of students saying they want to become billionaires. They throw me lots of Excel spreadsheets, especially at business school, which don't mean a whole lot to me. So what's the experiment and what's the prototype? A lot of the challenges that I saw just before lunch with a lot of animated discussion, what would be a small little step or a hypothesis that you could do to get you to a better place? I used to have dark hair. I realized taking on grand challenges makes your hair gray an awful lot. But doing small experiments is a wise thing that entrepreneurs do. And you might not realize that this is the number of attempts at finding a prototype that this man made before he perfected the vacuum cleaner called Dyson. And by the way, ladies in the audience, men use this machine because it's a power tool. Men also see that there's no bag, so you immediately get feedback that the carpet is dirty. He's worth 5 billion pounds self-made. He's passionate about the intersection between engineering and design, and he's very, very upset with what governments are doing, particularly in the UK. That was principle 2, you experiment. Principle 3, you do this with other people. Duh, isn't this obvious? The mad lone inventor doesn't work. This is a company that was started by one of my students called PowerKiss. This little graphic, it's you take your little mobile phone out. There's a little dongle that you put in. You put your mobile phone down on the power source, and it automatically powers up your phone. Brilliant concept. Try and do this business on your own. She decided, well, really, no. She went to a furniture show. The Finnish government has a very good program of putting in big companies, entrepreneurs, and giving some government money to find new prototypes to develop. The furniture people liked Maya, and you'll see that this is in our design factory. That table has got an electric power source in the bottom. That little dongle you put in your phone, it lights up pink, like a little lip that you're getting kissed by your husband or your wife in the morning. Brilliant idea. Big companies are really interesting because Maya asked me to meet her, and I got off the plane in New York, and this is the sign that I saw. The advice I give people everywhere is observe everything, slow down, take pictures, ask people, ask for forgiveness afterwards. Experiment, 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 and do it quickly. I looked at this and said, PowerMat, wireless charging, short story on this company, venture capital back, Silicon Valley, powered surface. You put the phone on the surface, it powers faster than if you plug the phone in the wall. Ooh. Small little thing about PowerMat, PowerMat bought PowerKiss. Small thing about PowerMat, PowerMat itself was bought by a company called Procter & Gamble who makes Duracell batteries. So if there's something around the world, small companies and big companies, the entrepreneurs de-risk the stuff that big companies know they need to do. I see this all the time, all the time. Fourth element, surprise. What's the insight you didn't know before you got started? And if I had a picture, you're a bit of an older crowd, but youth hostels, particularly among young people, look something like this. Bed bugs, bad part of town, usually students in there because it's cheap, place to stay. I invited a guy to one of my classes. This guy, his name is Oscar. He wanted to set up a youth hostel at Stockholm Arlanda Airport. Stockholm said, no, 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 we don't want a youth hostel in our nice fancy airport. He was going on for a year trying to get this thing passed, and then suddenly he got so upset one night, he went out for a beer, had a chat with the guy next to him, and the guy said, I wanted to set up a bar at the airport, and they said, no, a bar. He said, yeah, I had a really innovative idea. I wanted to take this bankrupt plane that had been parked outside the terminal for 6 years, move it up to a gate, open up a bar. By the way, I think that's a great idea. But there was contracts limiting the number of people who could serve alcoholic beverages in Stockholm, and Oscar said, well, interesting. He decides to cut the security fence down, move the plane, and open up a youth hostel. Now, I defy anybody in this room to tell me that's plan A. He's getting all kinds of press. It's along, and it's adjacent to the Stockholm Arlanda Airport. If you ever fly into Stockholm, you can see it flying in off the runway. This is from a surprise conversation with a guy at a bar one night in Stockholm. And guess what? When he came with this plan, the airport said, why not? What I want you to think about, and this is what I teach all of my students and executives, is it's all about lemonade. Now, actually, Lebanon is a very good place to sell lemonade. Finland, not so, because it was snowing yesterday when I left. Okay? And you might know that these American kids, Gabby wants to set up a lemonade stand, and my students are extremely good at designing a lemonade stand. I'm selling something, it costs something. The accounting professors tell you the difference between prices and costs and profits. You have to set up design a stand like a pop-up. You have to get the recipe from grandma. They're very good at setting up these small prototypes. And the philosophy we have at the university is something called design, thinking, and doing. And by the way, you don't have to be a designer to do this. And there's a very powerful, I spent a lot of time in design schools, there's a very powerful process that goes on inside design schools that I'd like to see in engineering and business schools. And I wanted to give you a little feel. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of what Alto's doing. The left side of the business is what the university does, not interesting at all. The more interesting part of the business is the right side, where the students actually said to the adults, come on, let's create a new university. if you want some advice from me, because my hand has been on that right side, the Alto ES people in the middle is the largest student entrepreneurship club in Europe. They move so fast, they drive our president crazy at times, but in a good way. They have set up a startup sauna accelerator. They've arranged through Startup Life internships in Silicon Valley. And some of you may have heard of Slush. If you want to go and get real inspiration, Slush is a student-organized 2-day conference that happens in Helsinki in November. Last year, 17,000 people were there, all student-run. I'm a big fan in students driving agendas. And actually, the guy who just ran Slush quit, has started up a business and raised 17 million euros in venture capital. 26 years old. So it can be done. But here's the challenge that I want to leave you with. Gabby wants to do a Starbucks business. She's not interested in one little stand. She's interested in a Starbucks business. And these are the kind of people that come to my office. And I have a real problem I'd like to pick your brains in here in Beirut. My students are too young. They know too little about the real world. Because the question, if she wants to do a Starbucks, is, I understand a stand and she wants to set up a stand at every corner. A high-growth entrepreneur, to me, is somebody who has some very interesting characteristics. They're usually married, they have been in industry, and they have a boss who says no. These are the kinds of people that start a business. And so the question I would be asking Gabby is, if you really wanted to do a Starbucks here, did you work at Starbucks? What did you learn about Starbucks? What's the secret of Starbucks? What were the mistakes that Starbucks made? You'd only know that by actually being in Starbucks. And so the advice I give a lot of my young students, don't expect to start a high-growth business when you graduate, 1. 2, I actually think the bigger need is to go into industry and develop your CV. And by the way, I'll share you a little secret. Industry people do not like to hear the word entrepreneurship. But what industry people do need and what governments do need is creativity. And my students are full of creativity. And I think one of the big collisions that should be happening is, how do you harness the creative energy of the students with the reality of people who are trying to solve problems inside governments and inside organizations? And I want to share with you an experiment that we're going to be doing. It's already ongoing. I have companies actually lining up talking with me to do ideation challenges involving my students. And one of them that we just completed was Rethink the Concept of Aging. This morning, we just heard from a banker. In Santiago last year, I did Rethink the Concept of Banking for Banco Santander. 20 designers in the room, 4 days. We had 4 big ideas out of that class, 4 big ones. And in fact, one of my students told me, Peter, it's in Spanish, you won't understand, but here's a video clip. Banco Santander stole one of the ideas and actually implemented it. Wow. There's big, big challenges, and there's a great opportunity here to harness this creativity among the young, working with people who have more experience. Because this aging business, by the way, the students actually discovered one thing when they actually had conversations with their parents and their grandparents. Nobody wanted to be told they're old. They're more experienced. And if you actually think about it, if you're over 50 in Finland, of which this is 40% of our unemployed workforce, you've been out of school for 30 years. A lot has actually changed. I have a couple of 50-year-olds in my class right now, and I know how difficult it is for them, but how much benefit the young students get from mixing across generations. There was an awful lot of takes in this, but the one area, particularly for the universities, which I think is interesting, I think this whole lifelong education element, there's interesting new designs. I'm fascinated by this whole issue of retirement. I think retirement is such an old concept, pardon the pun. Such an old concept. It doesn't work financially, it doesn't work socially, it doesn't work from an engagement platform. And when if you set up an artificial age like 64, then something happens at 64 in one day. And I think it's time for a rethink, and we're actually rethinking this in Finland as we speak. Because this is artificial. Who says contribution stops at age 64? But who says anybody under 18 doesn't have an insight? And so I want to finish with an inspiration. I won't show this video clip, but I've embedded it in the presentation. I would encourage you to go and look at this video clip. I want to introduce you to this kid named Jake Bonneau. I came upon this clip 4 days ago. It is fantastic. This kid is 8 years old. 8. Went to his father and said, "Dad, I'd like a Lego set and one of these big sets that had 4,000 pieces that cost $400. And the father said, age 8, I'm not giving you the money, you're going to have to earn it. And the kid on this video goes, I've got to raise $400. How do I raise $400? He sets up a lemonade stand at age 8. First year, $2,000 in sales, $900 in profits. Age 8. Age 9, you'll see in the top left, it's a bit blurry, there's a little placard called the Young Americans Bank. This bank lends to only kids, on the kid's signature. When he was age 9, he went to the bank and he got a $5,000 loan because he wanted to hire 3 more kids to set up 3 more stands. And this 9-year-old kid decided, I want to make an incentive for the kids, so he gave them a base salary and a cut of the profits, age 9. And the video clip, which I urge you to have a look at, this kid at age 10 went on Shark's Tank. Does anybody know Shark's Tank? He raised $50,000 on the floor at age 10. And if we need any kind of jolt, this kid will never have a problem getting into school. Never have a problem getting into school. So we ought to be actually thinking about touching people an awful lot younger in the piece. This kid will get into Harvard, no problem whatsoever. And it's a bit of a humbling experience when I show this to my university students who think I'm really so smart, you know, and I can go raise money. And they look at this kid and said, this kid is fantastic, okay? So I urge you, we ought to think about, designers always think about these variables. Suspend them a little bit. We have a creative challenge ahead of us. We have a creative challenge. Young people are highly creative, highly disruptive. What they do not have is a very deep appreciation of how the world works and the impact their disruption has on the real world. There's elements of free they don't understand. And I firmly believe you have a business model for society that you need to think about. And that's a design exercise. And I urge you here to think along these terms, question everything, observe everything, and start asking yourself, why not? Thank you very much.